This program is brought to you by Stanford University. Please visit us at stanford.edu.
It gives me great pleasure this morning to introduce our guest lecturer, Erica Huggins. Erica currently teaches at University of California, East Bay in Women's Studies. She focuses on human rights movements, women leadership in social justice and human rights, the Black Panther Party, spiritual activism, resilience training for teachers, mind, body wellness, and the social, physical, intellectual, and emotional needs of young people of color. She was director of the Oakland Community School from 1973 to 1981 and plans to open another school in Oakland or East Palo Alto with the intention that the model of the school be replicable and transferable to many communities. She is currently pursuing a master's in sociology, and her thesis focuses on the question, do educational conditions impact the multi-generational legacy of slavery of African American youth? Without further ado, let's welcome Erica Huggins.
How many of you were here when Elaine Brown spoke? Okay. Could you turn to one another? Anybody, just turn to somebody, and say one thing that you learned while she was here. If your response to my question is, oh, I knew everything she was about to say, go deeper, okay? Find something that was new for you, not just during the question and answer session, but as she was talking. Okay, if you do that now, just turn to someone. And if you don't know the name of the person next to you, introduce yourself. Okay, all right. I see that some people didn't have anyone to talk to, so I'm sorry about that, unless that was your choice. So, what did you learn? Just shout out. You do shout out at Stanford. You can just say what you learned quickly.
I learned a lot about the sexual politics, kind of, and the role of women that I hadn't realized before.
Specifically? She
talked about, you know, like in a response to a question she was asked about sexism, she responded by saying that she didn't think of it kind of that way, and that women kind of were able to be as powerful as men, and then, you know, they kind of stood up for themselves.
Right, and I'll talk more about that today. Thank you. Something else?
Well, I learned that the party went on to the 80s when she was talking about the school going on. I usually think of the Black Panther Party, I think of it like late 60s, early 70s.
I know, because that's what the media does with it. Yeah, and I'll be talking about that some more too. And as Huey said on this bit of Eyes on the Prize, it's the party's community survival programs that were our work, not court cases and the sensational things driven by police repression. Thank you. Something else? What Bobby said there wasn't just a soundbite. He was telling the truth. I wouldn't have joined an organization that was racist in any way or racialized things. We happen to be African American, but that didn't mean that we hated anyone. We didn't. Somebody here was about to say, were you about to say something?
It's kind of the same thing that was said earlier, but never mind.
Well, no, you don't get to say never mind. Your voice is important. What were you about to say?
I mean, so she spoke about how women were able to sort of achieve power, but I also learned that there were a lot of men within the party who were very defensive of...
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. We live in the society we live in, and it's a gendered society, isn't it? Yeah. Thank you. One more thing from somebody, anybody. Something that surprised you. How about something that surprised you? We can, as students, and I know that I'm going to be a student for the rest of my life, whether I'm in school or not. Do any of you feel that way? There's always something to learn until you close your eyes on this life. Always something to learn. The minute you think there's no more to learn, something dies inside. Do you think that might be true? So I am in continual wonder and curiosity about the way things work in this world, which is what drove me to join the Black Panther Party. I grew up in Washington, D.C., where it's very obvious there are some people who have, and then down the road there are some people who have not. That was my first entry into, as a child, into how the world works. Now, perhaps that isn't your entry. Perhaps you've never experienced poverty. I'm assuming there are people in this room who have not experienced poverty. And then again, I know that there are people in this room who have experienced poverty and the trauma that goes with it. And where I lived in Washington, D.C., I was never hungry, but our family didn't have a lot of money. And down the street from me was a housing project. It was so horrific that in the wintertime, I would cry when I saw people living in their cars in the snow. This is the United States of America that goes trotting all over the world to save people. There's something wrong with that. So that was my entry point. And I kept asking my mother, how is this so? How is it that the White House can be lit up like that at Christmas, and there are people that don't even have bread and milk any day of the year? How does that work? And my mother was the first person to tell me about slavery and racism in her own very simplistic way. But I lived with this idea that I would do something with my life, do something for people. And then I went to the March on Washington. What year was that?
1963.
I'm not talking about all the other marches on Washington that happened later, but 1963, I went there. I was about 15. And I made a vow that day, having listened to all the speeches and seeing all the thousands of people, that I would serve people for the rest of my life. And so I did, and so I do. Che Guevara said something that, do you know who's Che Guevara, by the way? Let's stop for a second. I don't want to make assumptions here. Who is he? Who was he? He was a revolutionary. Where? From where? Where did he grow up? Argentina. What was he trained to be? A doctor. And then what did he do? He did what in Cuba's revolution? You don't know? The farm worker, he worked with he worked with the people that lived in the mountains. He worked with the people who really had nothing. But he also worked with Fidel Castro, and then he was grossly assassinated at some point later. As I talk about a person in history, you know, Huey Newton and Bobby Seale being two of them. Huey is also not alive anymore. And when I talk about them with great reverence, that doesn't mean I don't understand the mistakes that they made. Just understand that about me. But I constantly look for the good things that people do in this world. Do we get to read about those good things in the newspapers and on the news? No, not enough. Once in a blue moon, as my mother would say. So Che Guevara said something beautiful, and it's a principle that I live by, but it's a message for me. A true revolutionary is guided by feelings of love. I might have the word true in the wrong place, but it doesn't matter. A revolutionary is guided by true feelings of love. Whichever way you want to play with it, in my poor paraphrasing here, you get the point. And so Huey was guided by feelings of love, and Bobby, and Fidel, and Che, and Mao, all the great leaders were guided originally by that, regardless of the mistakes they made later. And they made really amazing mistakes. But then name me a human being who hasn't made mistakes. Can you name one?
Jesus.
He says he made a mistake of having people, he says that he made a mistake of having people revere him more than their own hearts. Because if we really revered who he really was, we would live like that, wouldn't we? Do we live like that? No. I mean the collective we, I don't mean just this little pile of people in this room. No, we don't. And look at the things that have been done in Jesus' name. It's horrific, still being done in Allah's name, in the Buddha's name, in our ancestors' names, in our grandparents' names. And we can think for a moment about the things we do in our own lives that don't really serve us or others. So consciousness is a pervasive thing. If you have it, it enters into everything in your life. Doesn't it? If you're awake, then you're awake. If you're asleep, you're asleep. You can't kind of be like this in a perennial nod about life. You got to be sort of awake, aware, alert, listening, watching, wondering, asking questions. Please do that. So what I want to focus on today is some of the things that you actually said that you learned or surprised you. And that is the Black Panther Party focused a lot on helping people to maneuver a society that did not at all revere them as human. Does anybody remember any of the laws that described a slave? How is a slave described in law due to the institution of slavery in this country?
It's like the 3/5 compromise. Right?
Tell us about the 3/5 compromise.
They said that the slave population would count for 3/5 of, well, 3/5 of the slave population would count towards apportionment of representatives in Congress.
But there's something more to that.
So they're less than human.
They're less than human. Are you less than human?
No.
No. How could a law in a wealthy, conscious, intelligent country say that some humans were not human? What was the reason for that? It wasn't just meanness. What was the reason for it?
The reason was to prevent because slaves couldn't vote, and so they were being represented by white Southerners that were perpetuating slavery. So the reason that they were fighting is to get the North wanted less Southern representatives.
And what was that all about?
Well, because I know they didn't it was like the Southerners didn't want to have to pay taxes on them, and then the Northerners
Pay taxes on them because they were what?
they were
Property.
yeah.
You should look at property law. Did you know that real estate law came out of property law? Really and truly. If I don't know any of you who are going, how many of you want to become lawyers? Look at some of the old law. I mean, it's amazing. The country was built, this country was built on humans as property. Have you thought that through? Some of you are nodding your heads. It's hard to think about it, isn't it? Now, if you're sitting there saying, why is she blaming me? Then you're not with where we're going in this class today. No one's being blamed. This is just history. Isn't it history? A for real history of the United States? It's just history. You didn't have anything to do with that. You didn't have a thing to do with it. What you do now, however, is important. So go on. So they were property, and they didn't want to pay taxes because...
Well, who wants to pay more money?
That's right. It's all about money. And so racism then was the excuse for doing what happened. And did it get apologized for? Slavery, I'm talking about. Publicly apologized for? Did it? No. Did it get acknowledged in such a way that people knew that it had happened and the trauma that arose from it? Do you think? It did? You think it got acknowledged? No. And I think we learn about parts of it. But certainly not in elementary school, in the history books, right? What about middle school? What about high school? Maybe.
In a class I had yesterday, we were talking about how there's, in Washington, D.C., there's a Holocaust museum about like something like a genocide that was so important in a different continent, but yet we don't talk about, we don't have like a museum.
There are two Holocausts in this country. What are they? Slavery and the indigenous people. Right? It's a Holocaust. But if we name them Holocaust, then that means what? What does that mean?
We're responsible for it.
Yeah, the country is responsible for what it has done. But America never does anything wrong. The government. Do you ever notice that? Like everybody else is wrong but America? It's very, very interesting. What I'm doing is I'm walking you quickly through history so we get to the point where the Black Panther Party is created. Okay, in addition to it being ruled by a dominant power structure, who were the people in power? Could you give me a profile of the people in power from the earliest time through to now? Pretty much. Just give a simple profile. Someone who hasn't spoken yet. Because I know you all know what I'm talking about. A profile of people in power in the United States. You.
Well, white people who were grew up in.
Well, they're white, yes, because that's how the country was. It was taken from, the land was taken from the indigenous people, and then all other, and they were immigrants. The Europeans were immigrants, right? What's that thing about too many immigrants today? We're all immigrants. Anyway, so they were European, American, and what else?
And they were more educated.
So they were maybe educated and middle to upper class, right? What else? You're leaving out something important. Men. So where were the Protestant? Yes. And that all has to do with how things were structured. Okay, what does it mean that we live in a society that is not only has a racial, an ethnic dominant culture, but a gender dominant culture? What does that mean for us as generation after generation as we grow into adulthood? What does that mean? What are we taught? So what does that mean if you were a woman? What would that mean for you? If you play by the man's rules, that you're inferior if you're a woman, that you are what else? Dependent on men. What do you get paid on the male dollar? 79 cents on the male dollar. Why is that? Explain it. Can you explain it?
A lot of ground to catch up.
Pardon me?
There's a lot of ground to make up.
Yeah, but how can that happen? I'm curious. How can it just be like that, that a woman gets 79 cents on the male dollar?
You can start with education, because women
For the boss that does it?
What's
For the employer that does it?
I'm sorry, I missed it.
Why is it okay? How do the employers get away with paying that amount of money?
Create gendered jobs.
Ah, gendered jobs. Okay, wait, we're not done with who gets what on the male dollar. What do African American women get on the male dollar? 59 cents. How about Latino women? Somewhere around 49 cents. And the census reports and surveys say that there isn't enough information about Asian women yet to give. But they're somewhere between 49 and 59. When I first read this a few years back, I was like, my jaw dropped to the floor. It's like, what? What does that tell you about the society we live in? This didn't happen yesterday. I'm giving, you know, the 59 cents and the 79 cents is better than maybe 20 years ago. Okay, so I'm not even going far back in history. That's maybe, it's in the 2000s. So what does that tell you about the society we live in? You're going to transcend those numbers, you, in this room. You're going to transcend that. You're going to make it happen. You're going to do it different. But what does it tell you about the way the world works?
Inequality is okay.
Pardon me? Inequality is okay, and we just go along and sort of, you know, go with the flow, don't rock any boats, everything will be okay. All right, so, yes?
Well, make you think that because things are better, that there aren't any problems anymore because things are so much better than they used to be when they're still.
My students tell me all the time, you know, sexism and racism used to exist, but it's all better now. Hello, where? And they say, oh, you know, we're in the Bay Area. Huh? There's no racism in the Bay Area? But it isn't really that they mean that. That's what we tell one another. I'll give you a definition a recovered heroin addict told me once about denial. You know what denial is? What is it? What's denial? The concept of denial. What does it allow for a person to do? My friend in the green shirt, yes?
Denial allows you to avoid facing the things you should.
Mm-hmm. Avoid facing or blame somebody else for it, rather than just go on and being straightforward about it and simple about what's going on. So this recovered addict friend of mine said, denial is an acronym. And I go, what? Because I can figure out what she was meaning. And she said, don't even know I am lying. I love that. Denial is like that. You've told yourself this lie so long that there's no racism, it's all better, women get as much as they need, women can go anywhere and become a CEO or a whatever, that you believe it, and it isn't true. So I did all that to get you to the inception of the Black Panther Party, and the women and the men came together. Did you see all the women in the Black Panther Party on here? No, you didn't. You saw one speaking, and you saw Kathleen in those horrible camera lights. Where were the women in Sacramento? Where were the women members of the party in the continual interviews there? Where were they in the media-driven portrayals of the party? Who are they? Bless you. Can you name them? Bless you again. Can you name them? Other than Elaine Brown, Kathleen Cleaver, and perhaps myself and Angela Davis. Did you know Angela Davis was a member of the Black Panther Party? She was for a little while. So name some women. Yeah, it's hard, isn't it? That's because we live in a society that functions through all of these concepts, like constructs like race and class and gender. So certainly, they're not going to show the women. And also, if the women are shown, that would mean that the party's programs would have to be shown. Why? Because the women were running them. Well, hold up. Why would that be so? Why wouldn't the government want you to know about, see this list? This is some of the 40 party programs, okay. People's free medical research health clinics, free food programs, people's free community employment program, people's free shoe and clothing programs, the Intercommunal News Service, which was a party's newspaper up to 1980, legal aid and education programs, Seniors Against a Fearful Environment, which is a senior transportation and support program, kind of like Meals on Wheels, like the great-great-grandmother of Meals on Wheels. Free pest control program, much needed. Intercommunal Youth Institute, which became Oakland Community School, and the Child Development Center, which was the feeder daycare center for the Intercommunal Youth Institute that changed its name to Oakland Community School. And under, in small print, you'll see very specific programs. And this is not all of them. This came from a magazine called the Co-Evolution Quarterly. And this is from 75. And I'm going to pass this book around, and you can look at this book. A friend, Lisbeth, collects all these things for me and for posterity. So it's about all of the party's programs, and also a huge portion of it is about the school, the Oakland Community School, which I'm going to be talking about. So I'll just pass it around. I don't mind if you look at it while I'm talking. It's a little bit heavy, and I'm sorry that it is. I'd like to make a little handout booklet to give to students, but I'm not a rich lady. I want you to know about the party's programs. So let me focus right now on the party's educational programs. And one of the points of the 10-point program focuses on education. And Awele will just read that point.
Something that just popped in my head.
Yes.
It's a critical thinking strategy that I was exposed to called light and shadow.
Mm-hmm.
When you said, what did the media focus on? Because if they did focus on the women, they would have to focus on the programs. But yet, what the public knows is about toting guns.
Yeah.
And that's about it.
Yes.
And so it was just...
And not only that, as you said, it stops at around 1970 or something, if that, maybe 69.
And so what just came into my head was that we have to constantly ask ourselves, what is in the light?
Mm-hmm.
And therefore, what is in the shadow? What is
Thank you
not
very
being
much.
shown, what is not being said?
That's a very good way, because that applies to our individual selves as well. What's in the light and what's in the shadow.
Because we can't always illuminate, but some people choose not to illuminate.
So what we're doing today is we're putting women in the Black Panther Party and the Black Panther Party's community survival programs in the light. So thank you, Awele. Can you read point 5 of the 10-point program, which Bobby Seale alluded to on Eyes on the Prize? Community survival programs.
Okay.
Or just survival programs for short. That's how we would say it.
We want an education for a people that exposes the true nature of this decadent American society. We want education that teaches us our true history and our role in the present-day society. We believe in an educational system that will give to our people a knowledge of self. If a man does not have knowledge of himself and his position in society and the world, then he has little chance to relate to anything else. This is point number 5.
And thank you so much. And the 10-point program was written at what is now Merritt College, used to be called Grove Street College, in October of 1966 by Huey Newton and Bobby Seale. So you would want to read the 10-point program at some point. It's quite beautiful. And I'm sad to say that the things we wanted then are still the things that people want now. I'm not sad that they want them. I'm sad that things like housing and food and clothing and shoes and education need to be things that people still have to ask for in an accessible way. All right, so the Oakland Community School, where did it come from? What was the Intercommunal Youth Institute? What was our idea with the free breakfast program? These were all educational programs. By the way, did you know that you saw the children singing at a free breakfast program? I think that might have been in Chicago. But it could have been in California. No, it was in San Francisco, that particular one, because I remember a particular man in the film, Charles. Why was the free breakfast program created? Why do you think? Take a guess. A guess is good. You don't have to really know. Why do you think that might have been important? Can we hear from someone who hasn't spoken, and then I want to hear from you? What do you think? Take a guess.
To assist young children who were in school systems who weren't adequately funded, to help provide for them.
Yeah, so they could eat some breakfast. It's just simple. They didn't have any breakfast. So, did you have to go without breakfast in the morning? And maybe you chose not to eat it, but many of you had some breakfast if you wanted to eat it, right? And some of you didn't, right? Some of you didn't. Okay, I'm not making any assumptions about who you are, but food might have been available for many of you. Okay, so yeah, to support those children so they could go into the school day not focused on hunger, but focused on education. That's why it was created. I was going to tell you something. The police shut down many breakfast programs in churches, came in with guns focused on the children and the people feeding them and shut them down. Let's have a working definition of violence. What is violence? What do you think violence is?
Violence.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, that's a guns blazing at a free breakfast program. I think would pretty much
fit the bill.
Fit the bill.
Yeah, that is violent. What is it? What's violence? That's an example of a good example of it. Yes.
Forcibly depriving people of their rights and privileges.
Even their movements, or their speaking, or their actions. Okay, well, what's all the stuff that the guys, the police guys and the government guys were talking about that we were militant and violent? I think something was reversed and we believed it. I think there were ways in which the Black Panther Party was violent as opposed to nonviolent. But would you say that we live in a violent society? So we'll just work with this violence, okay? They continually shot and killed, like the 17-year-old boy, who, by the way, Bobby Hutton, you saw him in the march on Sacramento with his little stingy brim hat. Then you saw the picture of him after he, you know, from the newspapers once he was murdered. But he had stripped down to nothing except his pants. He was shoeless and shirtless, obviously no bulges of any kind, no gun. He was shot so many times that when I saw his body on that day of the funeral, the people who prepare a body could not patch up all the holes. I still remember it. Do you forget something like that? Is that violent? If somebody's already dead, why do you have to keep shooting them? Go back to the 3/5 something something thing? Is that inhuman treatment? Is it cruel and unusual punishment? Could we call it violent? Could we call it militant? Could we possibly call it extreme rightist or extreme right-wing activity? All right, let's keep going. So, free breakfast program first, and then those were all over the country, everywhere we could have them for the purpose of feeding children. And they would sing songs like Free Huey, but they'd also just sing songs, just regular songs. And what the newspapers carried is that we were teaching children to hate white people. And the FBI COINTELPRO created a coloring book that they said that we were using to teach hatred and violence. We had no such thing. I'm looking at a memorandum and an FBI document here. You can't really see it, but suffice it to say, it's another document from another time. It's from 1969. This is their memorandum to set up the circumstances on the UCLA campus that eventually killed John Huggins and Al Prentice Carter. John Huggins was my husband. But the picture here was drawn by an FBI agent. No self-respecting African-American man would draw another African-American man looking like this. It's just fake. So they did this all the time. Guess who paid the FBI to do this stuff? The counterintelligence program nicknamed COINTELPRO. Guess who paid them?
Tax dollars?
Taxpayers, like your mother and father, grandfather, grandmother, depending upon how old you are. All right, so then after the breakfast program sort of spread across the country, the federal government was so embarrassed by the Black Panther Party's breakfast programs that it started the free breakfast and lunch program, the federal one that you do know about. They were so embarrassed. They could have done it, but they didn't. We did it. All right, so then across the country in the various chapters, and there were 40 to 45 chapters of the Black Panther Party, progressive thinking party members said, well, why don't we have liberation schools? Why don't we have after-school programs like Jewish and Chinese after-school programs where kids get to know about the true nature of the society, themselves, and others? Why don't we have liberation schools? So they popped up everywhere. They were in California, they were in New York, they were in Chicago, they were in the South, and they were in the Pacific Northwest. And then in Oakland, which was the headquarters of the Black Panther Party, a number of women who were educated as teachers said, why don't we have a real school? Because our children are not getting educated. And David Hilliard and Bobby Seale's children were being harassed by school teachers and principals. Their little children were being harassed by grown-ups. You know, grown-up, supposed to be mature. You don't bother children. Is that violence? That's violence. That's violence. So David Hilliard and Bobby Seale took their children out of school, and we started something called the Children's House. And the Children's House was really there were two houses that the Black Panther Party owned. And in these houses, a full-day curriculum was given to the children, kind of like homeschooling on a large group level. My daughter went to one of those houses. And the children were educated collectively according to their need, according to their skill, and not necessarily according to their age. And then Elaine Brown's mother went to Huey Newton and said, we need a real school, not just a little house. We need a full-blown school. Can we do that? And Huey said, yes, we can do that. And so a group of people helped to raise funding to buy a building, first a house, a larger house in the Fruitvale area of Oakland, and then a huge building on what is now International Boulevard in Oakland. Are you familiar with Oakland, any of you? Okay, so it's 61st and East 14th, now International Boulevard. An old church building, perfect building. And we moved into that building in 1973 with a woman named Brenda Bay as a director. And then she went on with her life, and I became the director of the Oakland Community School. We taught a full curriculum. We taught, this was 1973, we taught Spanish. What happened to Spanish in the public schools? Let's see, what happened? Does anybody remember? Does anybody know what goes on if you speak a second language in some school districts? In some places, you're not allowed to speak it in class. In some places, like in Los Angeles, you can have a Spanish-speaking or other language tutor to sit in class with you if English is not your first language and you've just arrived here to this country. But it's not highly regarded anymore. What happened to it? What's affirmative action and what happened to it?
You got restricted.
Why was it created? I'm throwing out lots of questions for you to think about. But why was affirmative action created? Yes.
to counteract some of the setbacks of slavery on the black community by offering them.
It wasn't just for African Americans. It was for people of color in general. I don't like the term minority, if that's okay with you. You can use it. I don't. Because the word means less than. I don't see anything less than about people. It's one of those terms we use and we don't think about. What the heck does that mean? Okay. So anyway, so yes, it was created to reduce some of the setback and to allow for people of color and white women. We use this term minorities and women, but then we're not looking at wait a minute, something's missing here. Aren't there some women in that thing called minorities? So I'm just being plain about it. White women and people of color were afforded, the same privileges as white men. They were able to go to schools that before that time they weren't able to go to. And there were other ways in which affirmative action worked in the work world. Okay, but then it was restricted on many college campuses because it was seen as what? Reverse racism. Do you love it? Wait a minute, let's just checking in. Is that violence? Yes, it is. It's a form of violence. I'm not being funny when I do this. I want you to really think about the world we live in. And then some of us will excuse it. We'll say, oh yeah, maybe that is reverse racism. No, it's not. Do you remember the reason for the historical black colleges? Somebody just didn't have oh, this is a cute idea. Let's have some black colleges. No, that's not where they came from. You couldn't go to certain schools. All right, moving on. So the school, Intercommunal Youth Institute, that became Oakland Community School, had none of that happening. You could come to that school tuition-free and have your breakfast and lunch at school, be appreciated as a complete human being with great power in this life and great potential in this world. Your family was appreciated no matter what the circumstance. You were fine in the skin you were in. It didn't matter what color you were. Now, we lived in a community, the school lived in a community that was African American and primarily Mexican American. I don't want to say Latina and Latino and just glump everybody together. It was primarily Mexican American, although there were, at that time in the 70s, other immigrant peoples in large numbers coming into East Oakland and into Oakland from other parts of Central and Latin America. We had Native American children in that school, and we also had European American children in that school. I'll tell you a story, and the story is simply this, that the school, you could not get, it was part of the Association of Alternative Schools, but the California State Department of Education did not give accreditation to elementary schools that were alternative at that time in the 70s. So what they gave was an approval, and what they asked was that someone from the State Department of Education come and visit the school. And they sent the Assistant Superintendent of Public Schools at that time, William Whiteneck, to visit the school. Well, of course you know what one of our children said to him. Because we told them to question everything, and we said the world is your classroom, and the only silly question is the one you don't ask. So this little boy walked up to William Whiteneck and hugged him. He was a very tall guy, and hugged him with red hair, and hugged him around his thighs, because it was a little boy. And he said, "Is your neck really white?" I thought that was the cutest question. And the guy said, "Well, son, I guess it is." He didn't have any problem with that. I'm saying that the child just wondered about his name. He didn't even have any sense of race or color or anything. Well, William Whiteneck, after leaving the school on the way out of the door, gave me a hug, and he was in tears. He said, I came to this school today. There are 150 children, by the way, every year of the school's existence, and unborn children on the waiting list. And the children were not just the sons and daughters of members of the Black Panther Party, like it was in the Children's House with a few neighborhood kids. This was primarily the children that came from the housing projects nearby in East Oakland, and there were children who traveled in every day from San Francisco, from Alameda, from Berkeley, from Richmond, and El Cerrito. And their families were primarily poor. So William Whiteneck said to me that day, he said, I always thought I was coming to a storefront run by a militant organization. I said, what do you mean by militant? He said, I don't know. Erica, think about what the media says about the Black Panther Party. I said, I do. I give it thought often. And he said, I didn't come to a storefront. And what I've seen today in this school, I wish the California State Department of Education would adopt and replicate, not just in California, but throughout the country. Can we talk about doing that? And I said, sure, that's what we want. That's why we created this model. Of course, that didn't occur, because you can imagine that, not because of anything he did or the superintendent of public schools, but institutions are institutions. They're really cemented in terms of their beliefs, and curriculum at that time was very, very, very standardized. So what we were doing was revolutionary. Why do I say that? That making education of that kind in a poor community a priority. Why do I say that that's revolutionary? Well, that's one thing. It hadn't been done before.
I guess, because sort of what I guess what was perpetuated in society, like you sort of take care of those who are within the majority, I guess, but you sort of disregard like people of color, or you don't place as much emphasis on taking care of them.
So we were doing the opposite, and we were teaching them critical thinking skills. We told them that we were there to teach them how to think and not what. There's enough of what to think. Think like this. Buy this. Don't do that. Think like this. And if a child asked us a question and we didn't have the answer, we weren't embarrassed to say, we don't have the answer to that. Can you and I investigate? That was our famous question. Can you investigate? Even if a child came to report a fight, he hit me first and then she didn't. No, go investigate. Come back and let's talk about it. We had a board within the school that allowed for children to meet out peer, I don't want to call it discipline because that sounds strong, but peer tasks for children that didn't do their homework or who got into fights or were nasty with others in their communication. And there is, I wish you could see this clip that I'm thinking about. There's a clip of it, LeVar Burton on one of his famous children's shows like Reading Rainbow, there was another one called Rebop. But in this little clip, you see these little kids sitting around a table. There was always an adult advisor. Sitting around a table, and there's this little girl with glasses hanging down on her nose, and she hasn't done her homework for a week. And so the children are saying, well, Kim, why didn't you do your homework? I don't know, I guess I was just trifling. It makes you laugh, it's so cute. And then the students are sitting there like, no, they're not hearing it. So what do you mean? Why didn't you do your homework? Don't you understand your education is important? And she goes, yeah, I know. I guess I need to do something. Well, what do you suggest that you do as a result of not doing your homework? This was not prompted by adults. She said, I guess I should have to do my homework and turn it in and do an extra assignment. And they said, yes, that's what you should have to do. But also, you should think You should think good thoughts about yourself, or something like that. They didn't want her to walk away feeling horrible because she'd been there, which is what adults do to children and what adults do to adults. So it was an entirely different setup. Also, the children, when they did get in a fight, we had them go out in the courtyard. There was this beautiful circular courtyard between classrooms and offices, and we'd have them stand there and do the Hatha Yoga tree pose. If you've ever had to do the tree pose, you know it takes a lot of balance to do it. And it especially worked for fidgety kids because it brought them to focus and to balance. We wanted them to have internal locus of control. Do you follow what I mean when I say that? That your mind's not over here and your body's here and then your heart's somewhere else, that you're all in one place in your life. We taught them, we didn't teach them, I don't even know what it's called. We taught them something which we called political education, which in some classrooms is called, in some schools is called current events. We taught them what I call now cultural geography. Where are we in the world? What's going on here? What's going on in South Africa? Where is that on the globe or the map? How many of you can place all the countries in Africa properly? But that's you though, Whaley. But how many of you can tell me where Vietnam is on the Asian map? Great. What about the history of the Mien people? Huge populations of Mien people in this country. And the history is very interesting. All right, so we did a lot of that kind of thing. And when we found out that there were children after school was over at 2:30, 3 o'clock who were hanging out in the parking lot, at first we thought they just wanted to play and didn't want to go home. They were hanging out near the kitchen, which was toward the back of the building. I thought, what is going on? What are they doing? Why are they still here? Why aren't they home? So one day a bunch of us went out and did a little sample survey. Hey, what you doing? Why are you hanging out? Doesn't your mama know where you are? Go home. And what we found out is they had no food at home for dinner. So I went in the kitchen one day in 1976 and I said, Melvin, the main cook, who was the most generous-hearted person I think I've yet to meet, a person more generous-hearted, I said, the children are hungry. Can we make dinner also? He said, yes, we can do that. That's how we moved. That's how we did things. And the whole Black Panther Party operated like that. The free food giveaways came from the same feeling of love. So I'm going to stop now. I don't know how much time we have left, but I wanted, do we have any time left? I wanted to let you ask some questions about the school. I gave you like a whole bunch of stuff. But what I was trying to do is get you to a place where you could understand more about where the school came from. And women ran it primarily. Not because it was gendered work. You know, woman, you're a nurse or a school teacher. No, no, no. But because the women had the vision for the school, and Huey knew that. And the leaders of the leadership in the school was pretty well handpicked. What was surprising to all of us and surprising to people who researched the Oakland Community School is that many of the teachers were men. And at the Child Development Center, the feeder daycare center that was for 2.5 to 4-year-olds, they were primarily men. Changing diapers, patting babies on the back. Yes, it was revolutionary. And we don't know about those men. We don't hear about them. They're not on movies. They're not in documentaries. They're not even in books, but they will be, because a friend of mine and I are doing a chapter in a book about women in the liberation movements of the United States, a whole chapter on the Oakland Community School, and we speak about that. That's so important. So I wanted to stop there and let you take a moment to ask some questions. But first, before you do, you have a question? first, before you do, I'd like you to turn to one another once again and just say to the person next to you, and this time, if everybody would try to talk to somebody, say one thing that you've learned to that person, and then I'd like to hear your questions, or you could share a question that you have, okay? But just turn to one another now. Take a couple of moments. Okay, all right, thank you. I just found something that it just blows my mind. I forget things that do you ever forget things you've done and you go, oh, yeah. So I just found this this article I wrote on the disaster that school busing was in Ramparts magazine, along with some really famous educators by now, Jonathan Kozol and Herbert Cole. Are you aware of them? We were all in the Association of Alternative Schools together in the 70s. And they've gone on to become great writers, and I really enjoyed working with them. And so my quote here in Ramparts is a little picture of me with dark hair, and there's an article. Maybe I can figure out a way to share it with you. But the quote is, "We must stop busing children from one bad situation to another and deal with the real problem, an overhaul of public education." And my whole point in this article then, this was 1975, or I think it's 75, was why not fix up the schools in people's communities? Why send them where they're going to be probably, in the 1970s, treated poorly? Have a good day. And so my eye fell on that. So questions? In the back, and then you.
I'm just curious as to where they got the financial backing for all of these free programs.
The community itself is one part of the backing. The money we raised, you'd be surprised, the private philanthropists who gave money to the party for its programs. You would be so amazed if you heard their names. I don't remember all their names, but Leonard Bernstein was one of them. And there are many, many, many people in the entertainment industry in Los Angeles. And Huey also made friends wherever he went. He's very charismatic, so people would give money to the programs. The school, the breakfast program, was supported by, let me start back with the breakfast program, since that's where I started in terms of educational programs. Stores like Safeway, and I think Lucky's was around then, donated directly to the school. And also the government food programs, you know, the ones that give the nasty powdered eggs and the milk and the peanut butter. You know what I'm talking about. Yes, that's what I'm getting ready to say. The kids call those nasty eggs popcorn eggs, because when you mix them with water and cook them, they look like little bits of popcorn, but hey, protein. Anyway, they gave us food all the time. The churches gave us food. The churches gave us their basements free. And we also used some school building rec centers free. So a lot of things were given to us by the community and the churches and the small businesses in the community, absolutely free. Now, the Oakland Community School, we didn't charge tuition, but what we did was fundraising. I did it. We wrote grants. Listen to this. We got funded through for the Oakland Community School for 1 full year with criminal justice monies. Isn't that hilarious? It was the Law Enforcement Something Act. It was drug and tobacco monies to prevent drug and tobacco use among youth. And we got a huge grant from them because we wrote the grants really well. We really cared. We got State Department of Education monies, and we got private nonprofit corporation monies, you know, through grants like the San Francisco Foundation and the Irvine Foundation and so on. And then And then the sickle cell anemia research and fundraising that we did sometimes, well, it supported itself, it supported that program, but some of those monies also supported our health programs. We helped to develop a consortium of 12 community clinics. How were they financed? Doctors and nurse practitioners, as well as other folks, gave their time voluntarily in those clinics. That's kind of unheard of today. And some of those clinics still exist. La Clínica de la Raza in the Fruitvale in Oakland was one of those original 12 clinics. The Haight-Ashbury Clinic in San Francisco was one of the original those 12 clinics. And the party specifically ran one in South Berkeley called the George Jackson Free People's Health Clinic. And so many doctors and nurses and dentists volunteered their time, which is worth a lot of money. So thank you for that question. Did I answer it?
Yeah. It just seems so interesting just because how we were talking about the way in which the party was portrayed in the media, that so many people would be willing to volunteer.
Because they knew it was a lie.
Yeah.
In the black community, people knew that was a lie. You know why? Because we were feeding their children, helping the seniors, and keeping the police off their backs. We were not indoctrinating anybody. Actually, we got criticized by the socialist organizations and the communist organizations because we were feeding people, because we were doing all these programs, and they considered us to be the handout organization. That showed us that they didn't understand poverty. You can't give people, politics to think about if they're starving and their children are starving. So we were just consistently present in communities. So again, thank you for your curiosity and for your question and for what you just said about the way in which the media, the darkness and the light, back to this light and shadows thing. Yes?
You cited earlier...
Oh, I forgot that you had a question. Well, you'll go next. Go on.
You cited earlier sort of the way people, or the media at least, is treating the immigration issue as an example of oppression. And I wanted to know if you thought that immigration is a problem in America right now, or there
No, I don't think it's a problem.
Okay.
I think that I never think that human beings are a problem. I think America is wealthy enough to make anything not a problem if it wants to. And I think that what's considered to be an immigration problem has to do with with globalization. It sort of starts there. And I could go into a long thing about what I mean by that, but I really don't want to. I'd like you to look into it for yourself and see what the origins of this so-called problem are. Because for many, 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 many years, people were hired from Latin American countries, and especially Mexico, to take care of all kinds of needs of wealthy Americans. So how'd the word spread? Somebody in Mexico woke up one day and said, I think America's a nice place to move to. No. Something had been going on long before now. And something is going on in Mexico. Did you know that there are 400 or more missing women in Juarez? Why are they missing? Do you know where's Juarez?
It's close to the border of Texas and Mexico. Okay.
You think there might be 2 governments involved? Do you know where they worked, these women? They worked in factories supported by America and Mexico. If there was one American woman missing, would it be in the news? If she was white, yes. I'm sorry to say. 400. My students did a presentation on them, and at the end of their presentation, they devoted the last 2 minutes of the presentation to let those women's names just run in a scroll on the screen. It was the most heartbreaking thing. And it's their mothers, the mothers of these women, who are trying to find them. Do you know about this? Does anybody?
There's a beautiful play written, Great Sorrow, about there.
We'll find out, because this is the kind of thing. Immigration is hardly the problem. The problem has to do with a new kind of capitalism and also individualization in this country, meaning we're just all in our own little world over here or our world over there, our world, and we're all like disconnected. So we're not, I'm gonna leave it at that. I want you to think about it, but that's a great question. What do you think about immigration?
Well, I mean,
Is something you hadn't thought about, or something you do think?
It's something I think about all the time, actually.
What's your major?
Poli-sci.
Mm-hmm. And why do you think about it?
Because I'm always, I guess, in my mind trying to see if there are similarities between the struggle of, for example, people immigrating from Mexico in America and what black people face during the Civil Rights Movement.
There is, and before the Civil Rights Movement, go back to slavery. Slavery was high leverage for all the other crimes that have occurred in this country. If it was okay to have slaves and you don't apologize and acknowledge that, then it's okay to have whatever else, including the internment of the Japanese. There's been such okaying of things. It's when it gets to be an economic problem, then it's a problem. Do you know what I mean? So I'd like you to look into it some more. Yes, there are parallels. There are historical parallels and all kinds of other ones. You have a question?
Yeah. Well, I don't know.
Or time.
I have a lot of time left, but I wanted to ask what led you to join the party?
Okay. Well, I told you early on in Washington, D.C., watching people live in their cars in the snow, that prompted me to think like I think. As always, a very curious child, and constantly got told, stop asking so many questions. But I never did, because nobody really meant that I would stop. And then I went to the March on Washington and made a vow to serve people for the rest of my life. And then I went to Lincoln University in Pennsylvania. While I was there, Stokely Carmichael and Charles Hamilton were writing the book, Black Power. I didn't see myself as a part of history. I just thought it was really cool that these two wonderful men were writing this book, and we read chapters from it in this little tiny room in the Student Union building every Wednesday night or something. And so I started thinking, why am I on this campus? Am I really doing something? Then I started tutoring down the road from the school in this very poor community, rural community, with the demographics of Washington, D.C., Southeast. Go, how does this work? They live out in the country, and they're poorer than the people who live in the urban. I didn't know much about how things work, but I kept asking questions. And then I read a Ramparts magazine article. In Ramparts magazine was the classic great-great-granddaddy of underground magazines and newspapers. It was really amazing magazine, and it was published every month. And I got my hands on a copy of it in 1967. And the picture you saw of Huey Newton being shot in the belly and the police officer being killed were a featured story in that magazine article. It was the first I'd ever read of the Black Panther Party, and I thought, okay. I'm sitting in the Student Union building at Lincoln. The people cruising for a boyfriend or a girlfriend, playing bid whist and pool, and just hanging out, getting high, whatever. And I'm reading this article, and I look up from the page, and I go, okay, I'm really, really not on the right planet here. So I found John Huggins, and I said, John, I'm going to California to support Huey Newton's Defense Committee. And John Huggins, who was, had left the Navy, I'm saying left, he wasn't dishonorably discharged, but he was a tad from it, who had been on a ship, a Navy ship, when the churches were bombed in Birmingham, and felt like I did on that campus that day. That was his history. We connected at Lincoln. We became friends. And I said, I'm going to California, are you coming? And he said, yes. And we got in the car, and we drove across country. In 3 days, I don't believe we did that. I don't think we didn't stop except to pee. And we found the Black Panther Party. We got jobs in factories, and we found the party office, and we sold newspapers, and we spoke on behalf of the Black Panther Party. We did everything. It wasn't, you know, men didn't have a role and women had a role. When we walked into that office, the man was the receptionist and secretary. And he immediately gave us things to do, and we did them. And then John Huggins was killed in January 17th, 1969 on the UCLA campus in Campbell Hall. And then I continued to do my work, including starting a chapter of the Black Panther Party in New Haven, Connecticut, after I went to bury John. And our baby was 3 weeks old at that time. And then I was arrested and for conspiracy with the intent to commit murder, which was common in those times, that we would be arrested and held without bail and all of that. And but I was in jail for 2 years, and then I came out and continued to serve. So I gave you not only why did I join, but what happened when I did. And this, I knew that I was not joining an organization that would prolong my life necessarily. I knew what I was doing, and it broke my mother's heart, but I knew I had to do it. So thank you for that question.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Did you ask your question?
She asked that question about the financial.
I have a quick question. Did kids from the Oakland Community School end up then going to public high schools just in the area?
And middle schools. Can I tell? Do I have time to tell them one short story? So I've been interviewing students and staff from the Oakland Community School, you know, in this year, for my thesis. And I interviewed a young woman who now has a 4-month-old child. She's in her 30s. And she told me that the school was like the best part of her life. She went on to a Berkeley middle school and an Albany high school. Does anybody know where Albany is? You do. So you wouldn't call Albany the inner city, would you? Okay, all right. Now Albany is like a suburb kind of. Okay, and people do send their children there because the schools have smaller class size and those kinds of things, the quote, good school. So she went to Albany High. I asked her, my question to her in my list of interview questions was, well, how did Oakland Community School change your way of thinking about your academic career or your work in the world? And she said, let me talk about my academic career. She said, you know, career, high school. And she said, I went to Albany High from Claremont Middle School in Berkeley. My mother sent me there because she thought that it would be best. And when I was there, I had a history teacher with an antique history book. Well, this is common. We were talking about that earlier, how the history is like sort of there, sort of not. And she said that in the history, it was U.S. history, but it sort of had truncated versions of it. And in it, there were 2 chapters, one on something of slavery that kind of dismissed it, and the other chapter on something about Native Americans. And she said that when her history teacher got to that point, he skipped those chapters. She raised her hand because we told the children, question everything. The world is your classroom. If a person doesn't know, they will find out for you. We tried to keep it uplifting. So she said, excuse me, I don't understand why you skipped over the only chapters that talk about people of color. We need to know that in our history class. That's a logical question, isn't it? He said, I skipped it because I don't have time. And she said, but we need to know. Go to the principal's office right now. She went to the principal's office, and the principal said, go back to class and do what your teacher says or you'll be suspended. And she says to me, I have it on tape. She says to me, I was suspended. And I'm rooting for her on the inside, but I'm the interviewer, so I can't say much. I said, then what did you do? She said, I got home, I called my mother at work. I told my mother I'd been suspended for asking this question. She said, we're going down there right now. I'm getting off from work, I'm gonna take you back down there. And they went and they spoke with the teacher, and they spoke with, this is 1990 something, okay? Not the early 1800s, okay. And the mother said, why did you do that? It seems like a logical question to me. Well, it was an antique textbook. It wasn't a very good textbook. And I just figured I didn't want to spend time on it if it wasn't quite right. She said, well, why didn't you ask the kids to research something? Why didn't you find out more and give them more? Why would you do that to my child? And the daughter's sitting there waiting for an answer from him, and he says, oh, I don't know, I'm sorry. Well, the principal also said, we're going to reinstate her to school. Well, thank you very much. And what else? Well, here's the beautiful part of the story. The teacher, recognizing his own, what's the word for it?
Ignorance?
Ignorance, yes. And there was also some bias there. Said to the principal, what if we have her do something? What if we have her teach something? And the principal said, why don't we have her organize and lead the first African American History Month celebration at Albany High? And it was the very first. She said to me, and what I learned, Erica, is that the school taught me to think like that. And I also learned that in order to be a strong woman, I have to make sacrifices sometimes. So I leave you with that story. Thank you.
The preceding program is copyrighted by Stanford University. Please visit us at stanford.edu.